Can I start with you, Lacina, about the objectives that you presented for the Smart Africa, and which we all, I think, are very much supportive of. What do you see are the biggest challenges to making that actually happen?
Thank you very much for having me. The biggest challenge really lies still in the harmonization, which are the regulatory institutions. Because in Smart Africa, the 25 president, we have a resolved vision from the head of the state. They gave us a green light, we have to do this. If we don't do this, we are not going to be able to face the fourth industrial revolution. In terms of harmonization, yes, from one country to the other country, to come together at the telecom regulatory level, at the cybersecurity regulatory level, at ICT regulatory level, it takes a lot of negotiation in the Council of African Regulatory that we have, that we meet with the Council every 3 months in a different country to discuss all of these anticipating technology, including blockchain, digital ID, and so on and so forth. The harmonization is the biggest challenge. Because for the intra-Africa connectivity, we had the green light from the head of the state. We've done the blueprints for the intra-Africa connectivity project, led by Guinea and also one of our partners, Tata Communication. The study, the initial study came out. It tells us exactly what are the obstacles, what do we need to do in terms of fiber laying, laying down the fiber between the cross-country connectivity, and we know also the model. And last week during the Transform Africa, we were able to get at least one request passed on the board, which is that to allow us to actually explore the approach of SPV approach to finance cross-borders project. Because you see, in intra-Africa connectivity project, it includes more than one state. And we know, except the World Bank or sometime maybe African Development Bank, rest of the bank to deal with a bilateral relationship. We needed to have a vehicle together, Smart Africa in the country, to be able to move more, to move forward. So the obstacle really, the biggest challenge is really the harmonization.
And the political will going with it.
Yes.
I think that's a lesson for all of us to take home.
Yes.
And Kevin, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned also in your presentation the importance of the cooperation between the public sector and the private sector in, of course, making sure this transformation happens. Would you want to elaborate a bit more of it? Which has which role and how to make sure that they work in unison to push this forward?
Great, thanks, Vivian. Both are critical. And I think what we're seeing now is government, to some degree, catching up and realizing that governments have to own their own digitization narrative. And that's what a lot of the leaders of this conference are already doing, and we're seeing that spread. There are a few things that really the private sector can't or shouldn't do. One is making sure that everyone is included. We heard from Minister Ingabire of Rwanda this morning about how they thought through digitizing an environment where not everybody has access to the internet. And those are things that the government has to be responsible for. Data protection is the other one. That's simply a responsibility of the government. But the third thing that's critical is actually changing government from within. The private sector cannot be an advocate, is not in a position to be an advocate for changing government internally and changing the way business is done. And it takes leaders showing what's possible within government to convince their colleagues to come along with them. The technical skills and other things, the private sector is going to be crucial, but those three things really government has to own.
Thank you. And now I see the questions coming in. Thank you very much for that. I think we'll take first the one, does Africa see an opportunity to leapfrog other countries with outdated legislation and legacy infrastructure in digital? The perfect chance to make it happen, which I think is quite topical, especially for here in Estonia, where it somehow, in some ways, has happened.
As Minister Paula was on the previous panel, she just said it, like Rwanda, by innovating, delivering blood by drone. It's never done before anywhere else. Back in 1990s, when I was in the university in the UK, and Safaricom embarked on the mobile money, everyone thought they were crazy. Africa is the number one today. That's why our theme in Smart Africa is connect, innovate before you transform. The key word is innovation. You don't, whatever works in Europe is not necessarily need to work. You heard the president in the morning said, tailor-made. That's where the innovation comes into play. Yes, the legislation is outdated. We need to see a data governance innovations in the context of Africa. In fact, there is a cybersecurity paper from Malabo Agreement, which is being passed around for ratification. We have to look at it in the context of Africa. It's very simple. Look at today to the collaborative economy. Uber. Look at Airbnb. When Uber came a couple of years ago, couple of years ago, in Europe and the US, people were rising on strike. Oh, it's unemployment. I will imagine in New York, people who have a medallion for the taxi drivers, they will say, oh no, they're eating our pie. I was in Nairobi. They have Uber on a motorbike. What is that collaborative economy based on the peer-to-peer technology do in Africa? It's employment. We don't see that as a negative thing. Because first of all, people were not working. Today, if you get to Nairobi, you pull up your application, they have an Uber motorcycle, Uber shop, as they call it, and the regular Uber. So that's the kind of difference. Yes, outdated legislative is true because we are living in a world where today, the young generation is the Z generations. You see, historically, you have to look at Europe and North America. The government have been playing a catch-up game because technology is so fast. Yes, Africa being late today has an advantage because we are learning from a mistake to be able to anticipate and to make legislation not so rigid, adaptable as we move along. Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks. I don't know if you want to add to that, but I think it's somehow you started to give us already the keys to the debate we're having everywhere globally, really, about the balance with the social side. That what does it do to work and to jobs and so on. And we're having the same debate in Europe very much, where there's a lot of anxieties around AI and so on, where our role has been very much to calm, with Vice President Ansip, to calm the discussions really, and to explain that in the end, AI or all the digital solutions is just making or transforming the way you use these things into digital, but in fact it creates more jobs, brings more balance and so on. But that's something which we need to address, I guess, and make sure that people have the right skills and so on. When I look at the next questions here, was that when you in a region with different levels of digital development, would you recommend to build up digital cooperation first with best digitalized ones and then extend to others? I think that's a question for both of you from your experience.
My perspective would be that we've heard at this conference and in other settings that it's less about the overall level of digitalization or development and more about the political and social will and opportunity. I think Rwanda is a great example. As to the question of whether Africa can leapfrog, yes, Rwanda is an example of that. If I want an example of good government digital technology, I'm going to point to Rwanda, not to New York, quite frankly. So it's, I think that is what we look for, is more the ability to get things done, and to remember that it's important to start small. Particularly in digital government, where there may be skepticism or et cetera, just posting a win, even if it's just changing the website, so that people can see what's possible, and that it doesn't require a $100 million contract to a consultant to spend 3 years designing wireframes, et cetera. It's possible to just get something done with a fairly modest amount of money and a fairly modest team. Yeah,
in the Smart Africa perspective, it's different countries have a different level of ICT maturity, right? We try to identify regional champions. Regional champion, that's why we created the flagship project. For example, you can see Rwanda is the beacon on the smart city. They've done their part in terms of blueprints, and we are sharing those blueprints with the rest of the country members who have not even started yet. You look at the Kenya, they launched a digital economy. They are champion in the flagship project for digital economy. Tunisia, for example, in North Africa, they're champion in Startup Act. They did their blueprint, not only that, they passed a law in the parliament to say, not only we have to create a startup ecosystem, but we have to coach the startup and we have to give them first job. So we took that act as a model and we share it among our country members. Look at Cote d'Ivoire, for example, in cybersecurity. They are championing cybersecurity within the Smart Africa. They have to come up with a model. What do we need to have in terms of political orientation, different reform, different institution, CSERT and so forth. And we see exactly how that works in Cote d'Ivoire. We apply to the rest of the. Look at Burkina Faso, it's a capacity building. Look at the Niger, smart village. Why smart village? Look at 1.3 million, 1.3 million meter square in terms of surface. They're dealing with a lot of villages, so we say smart villages. So, and all the innovation that comes to this. So they have blueprint, that's how we actually, that helps us to identify the regional champion and we work all together. And we understand that's the challenge, of course. That's why we wanted to adopt, because the beauty of this is a knowledge sharing and also cost reduction because it has economic of scale.
Absolutely, thank you. And we have the same in the European Union because, of course, in every policy area, you have some countries which are more developed than others, but yet you see different kinds of very fascinating innovations done in parts of Europe where you wouldn't even expect them from. So I think that's the thing. It's best to take the best examples from wherever you can and then make the most use of it. I think another element there is how to make sure that the consumers or the citizens ask for these digital services. Because when we look at Europe, then I think it's 58% of the population that is interacting with our government, be it at local level or at federal level or government level digitally. But how to engage the other 42% and how to make sure that they are even asking or for these right digital services, because I think sometimes people don't even know what to ask for from the government.
I mean, many times the government doesn't even know itself what to ask for. A couple of thoughts. One is it's amazing what you can learn from bringing on a human-centered design team and really just thinking through these things. Secondly, governments need to be proactive. One of the grantees we've been supporting is a group in the United States called the Benefits Data Trust. The process of getting social safety net supports in the United States is, quite frankly, brutal and incredibly difficult to navigate. They've taken an approach of not waiting for people to come to them or come to the government, but actually using the data that they have and the data the government has to target people and go out and say, you know what, you're eligible for food supports. You're eligible for healthcare support. And really not take the attitude of waiting for people to demand it, but show what's possible. And once you show what's possible in one area of work, the demand comes in another.
With respect to Smart Africa, ask yourself a question. How long it took for home appliances to be adopted? 30, 40 years? How long it took for the radio, analog radio, to be adopted by the population? Then how long it took Facebook to have 2 billion users in the world? Because the world from the south side is younger and younger, it's a Z generation. One fundamental thing government need to know, government need to be ready. As they say in French, savoir faire c'est une chose, faire savoir c'est autre chose. You do things, you have to communicate. One by one rollout, we have this service now available online. We have this service now available online. And it will pick up because you are dealing with a young generation. If I'm talking just in the context of Africa. If you communicate the service online, people will actually do it. The example I gave in the beginning of my presentation, over 95% of the world is covered with the infrastructure combined together with the fiber optic and the satellite. Why people are not using it? It's a cost. It's a cost issue.
I think the one thing I would add, though, is that governments need to be very careful about forcing people into digital platforms. And that's the evidence from, say, rollout of Aadhaar in India and other cases is that really things can go quite wrong if there aren't appropriate safeguards for people who either don't want to use a digital method or don't have access, or for whom the digital method doesn't work for them. So it's important to sort of think through the business process engineering that allows those sort of outs and safeguards and workarounds so that systems work for everybody.
That's a very valid point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, it's good that you bring that point, because that takes me to talking about artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
We in Africa, Smart Africa, we truly believe that the artificial intelligence will benefit more Africa than even the Western world, for a simple reason. Look at the demography, look at the rate of literacy. Then you have digital literacy. Every single thing you introduce, any new technology you introduce in the digital transformation, that require a learning curve. In fact, you are widening the gap, if you're looking back. I will give you an example. KPI, the PKI, it's a public key infrastructure. Like if you go to Luxembourg or some Nordic country, you have to go to the post office, there is an agency, you have to get your car, you have to get your dongle. How am I going to teach my grandmother in the village to do that? You're actually introducing another gap. That's what we say. We have to look at it differently. Let's come to the AI. Today, there are natural language processes in artificial intelligence. If I can do a USSD code, say, send $100 to Viviane, why my grandmother cannot say in her natural language, send $100 to Viviane? That's what we're getting at. Today, in Africa, young people, they are developing things where you can talk to a smartphone and it will execute what an educated and ICT person can do. So that's actually shrinking, again, the gap. It means that people who did not go to school at all, they can use the technology tool to do exactly what a digital lecturers are doing.
Absolutely, because we've seen when in 2017, I was last time in Abidjan for the EU Africa Summit, and we had a fair of African startups. And one of them, for example, had developed an app for illiterate farmers to sell their crops. So you actually take the choices down to, to the actual person selling and producing his crop, give him the power, the possibility to make more money, and it's of course very much accustomed to the to the actual situation that you also do have people who need a different kind of app. Yeah. So no, I think that's, and I think another point that you made on the AI, it's also very valid from the point of view that we need to somehow demystify the whole debate around the artificial intelligence. Yes. I think when we discuss artificial intelligence, then not with people who are dealing with it every day, then very soon the debate goes into this singularity and in end of world the machines will take over. Whereas in the reality, a lot of it is just the machine learning. When we were in Senegal, then Atos, the cybersecurity company, explained they had built a supercomputer which takes in all the weather components and looks at the river of Senegal, the Senegal River, and can then predict if the river flows like this, that in the next 6 months it will flow the other way around, or it will move, and how it will move. And it has such an impact on the local farming that the cost of this supercomputer, which was I think around 15 million, was reimbursed with the first year. So it's remarkable when you think how this can be put really to the... And who would think that you would use AI in the farming in the Senegal River Valley? But there you go. It's something that can bring very much the added value.
I think this speaks, though, to the one of the challenges for government, which is to think a little bit differently about public goods in a digital era. So some of the public goods that we're going to need are fairly obvious. Platforms like digital ID, basic connectivity and infrastructure. But some of the others for a really AI-ready government are less obvious. Data sets, for example. The data sets for many African languages of labeled training data and recorded language don't exist yet.
Yes.
And so what we need to be, governments need to be thinking about investing in, and publicly oriented organizations like mine are data sets for public goods, and then let the innovators do the training, do the modeling to hit the goals. Similarly, governments hold a massive amount of data. This could be put to, and they need to collect more, whether it's weather data or et cetera. It could be put to a lot of use, but it has to be made, first of all, digitized in some cases, secondly, integrated, and third, made accessible in a way that still protects citizens' rights and privacy. That is a huge challenge. I think in the short term, it's a policy challenge. Over the longer term, technologies like fully homomorphic encryption and et cetera are going to possibly make questions like this easier to resolve, but this is going to be a huge challenge for every government, and a place where we're going to need a lot of investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree actually more. And because you see, we live in the fourth industrial revolution is about economy based on knowledge. Knowledge comes from information. Information comes from data. Artificial intelligence feeds from what? It's the data. In Africa, how many languages you have out there? So you can see the challenge. But until we actually have a data governance law, like the slide that you show, in Africa, if you look at Africa today, it's all scattered everywhere. You have a lot of hosting company, they come to the government, they approach the government. The data has been hosted in Ireland, we're hosted as well in the US or Latin America and so on and so forth. There's no protections. Until we have a GDPR, I'm not only advocating for GDPR, but we need to have a data governance law in Africa, which actually will turn out not to be a bad thing, because then the hosting company, they will know they need two things: infrastructure, telecom, and also they need infrastructure in terms of energy, and they need to know if they install the data centers in Africa, there are laws to protect it. As long as we don't have that, the transformation is not going to happen.
Absolutely, and this is the key also in finding the trust of people in using this, which is a case in point, of course.
Yes.
In many of these countries. Thank you for the questions. We have more coming in, and we have about the. There is one on on the unemployment and poverty. If we can get into a little bit more into that. So the question is, how has digital transformation helped address unemployment and poverty in Africa? I guess also in your role, Kevin, you've been confronted with that a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I don't think anybody knows the answer. A few answers that are possible. One is, I think there's going to be applications that help make labor markets more efficient. A great example from South Africa is an organization that really uses AI to help match job seekers to jobs. And if they can even do a voice assessment and hope to automate it of a candidate's skills and help them find jobs. But I think more broadly than that, there's going to be a need for digital skills training, as well as just basic soft skills training that are going to be needed for the future. But I think the key is to really, even as we start thinking about the disruptive consequences of AI, is continuing to look for those positive use cases and pushing them, whether it's in small, medium enterprises or agriculture or any of the other major employment sectors in Africa.
Yeah, I will approach this in a very different way. When you said how digital transformation will contribute to unemployment, that question is valid in Europe. is valid in North America. It's not valid in Africa because, first of all, he's not employed.
Mhm.
You see, manufacturing job, worker, he has a job. Robotic came in, AI came in, then probably the guy he's reaching like a middle-aged manager, stuff like that, 40 years, 50 years, then he needs to go back and learn. In Africa, there's no job. So I will say how digital literacy will contribute to unemployment. Then that's why you're not carrying any legacy. That's why I would really think we urge our governments, it is to close the digital gap. 3 approach. Not only in Africa. You will see if you have a top soccer or football player from a country like a Didier Drogba, every kid wants to be like a Didier Drogba. If you have a top singer from Nigeria, every kid wants to be. It's to give a hope to the young generation. And within Smart Africa, we're promoting gender equality. We're promoting a gender, women's in ICT, for example. Then young girls and young women will see that, oh, if she is in the top position of high tech today, it means I can be too. But you can only do that when you pass appropriate reform in the education system. One, you focus on the vocational training for people who are victims of a digital gap, vocational training, which is digital literacy. And from the primary school all the way to university, you have laws to integrate ICT into that. So I will not actually say, it's not, when you said technology, digital transformation will disrupt unemployment, because in Africa, as I said, collaborative economy, which is based on peer-to-peer technology today, is creating a lot of jobs in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think that's a great point, and this is the
Yes.
thing about the looking at the different regions that you
Yes.
have to keep the whole concept,
Yeah,
well,
because
the whole situation in mind.
You know, I'm not. If you look today in Smart Africa, it's very amazing. We're dealing with a country which were original French. We're dealing with a company, with the countries which were original British English, and we are dealing with a country who has never been colonized, like Ethiopia, for example. Then you can see the vibe and the dynamic, and you can see the rationale where all these policies are coming from. And that is the challenge. Then you actually know where the sweet spot should be. Because you have to be able to be thinking outside the box and anticipate what is to come. Okay.
This is an area, though, where the interoperability question
Yes.
and Smart Africa's work on creating a digital single market for Africa, which is not just about policy harmonization, but also infrastructure like digital ID, trade clearance, migration clearance, et cetera. You know, how do you get that trade number? Was it 18%
Yes,
is
18%.
internal?
Yeah.
How do you get that number up? And a lot of it has to do with just the business facilitation and making things move more smoothly and easily across borders could have a really transformative effect. And I think done well and done in an accessible and interoperable way, digital technologies, digital platforms enabled or created by government are going to be a fundamental building block of that.
In Smart Africa, we demystify the digital identity into one thing. KYC, depending who you are. If you are a business, it's know your customer. If you're a government, it's know your citizen. It is the fact that if you are managing a population, if you have a population in front of you, you're responsible, then they need to be administered. Take that key point, administered. We're talking about digital ID, Estonia being a beacon, they have a digital ID. Now we're talking about what's the cross-platform for digital ID to be able to know to interact together in Europe. In Africa, in some countries, more than 50%, they don't even have a birth certificate. Then how do we reconcile all of this? The government being late in passing legislation to do the biometric identification for his citizens, a pressure from e-commerce coming into Africa, where the e-commerce coming in from the private sector, who are talking KYC, we are talking KYC here, know your citizen. So we said we need to target quick wins. Quick wins mean banking system, which is anyone who wants to do a financial transaction, you want to know your customer. Then let's harmonize them on a platform. Let the government be trailing, for example, on the birth certificate, national ID. However, those KYC coming from the private sector, they are authenticated based on certain system, right? Which could be the old system of the government. Sooner or later, they will meet. Either the private will be leading, we see that in Nigeria, or the government will be leading, we see that in South Africa.
Absolutely, and I think what you say there is 50% maybe don't have the birth certificate, but everybody has a mobile phone.
Thank you.
And and that's the issue, that when I think we're too often complaining about, oh, people spend too much time on internet and so on, in the end, that's how you gain these digital skills.
Yes.
It's not exactly that most people learn that at school.
Yeah.
So, no, thank you so much for these points. I think when I look at the time running there, then I see that we have been, from that point of view, not a good panel, because a good panel has to have a conflict, and we haven't had conflict. We've been very much agreeing on what the main issues are and how do you deal with them. I think when I try to think what are the key elements is that we need political will. That's always something without what you cannot do. You need to demystify the process and see what the actual benefits are and how this makes it easier for people, creates more money, and in the end gives a better life. So would you like to say something for the end that would in a short way, looking at the time, that is something that you have to keep in mind and what you need to really push more attention to?
Well, if you next time if you want us a third panelist, and you can bring in an operator. Sorry, I hit. Hello? No, I'll just get up. Welcome. Hello.
No criticism.
No
here.
criticism. No, it's not. It's just basically. Yes, thank you. Yeah, basically, it's actually fun because all what Smart Africa is trying to say, we embark together with the private sector in this adventure. We working together because you have to recognize the fact that the private sector, they were the lead in the development of social economic in Africa. So we need to actually find out a quick wins and actually consolidate the asset they've been able to do in Africa to actually use it as a springboard to go forward. So it is not like the government is trying to come up with a new law to actually share their piece of pie and so on and so forth. No, it is about the government own a car, the driver back in 60s, 70s used to be the private sector, the government was a co-pilot or the passenger. You've done a pretty good job. Today we are in the GPS world. All we're saying, you as a private sector, you are the co-pilot, and we actually set the policy for orientation where we want to take our nation. That's all we're trying to say.
Thanks. Kevin?
Just a reminder that we, in the larger sense, are doing something new here. And particularly on issues like data governance, automated decision-making, and AI, we're blazing new territory. And we don't know what the right answer is. Nobody knows that, not even the Estonians. And it's going to be important to, one, learn as we go, learn by doing, learn together, and to keep the core values of including everyone and guaranteeing prosperity for everyone, while also keeping an eye on protecting basic human rights and privacy. And that needs to be our guide star as we go forward.
Perfect. That's a great ending. Thank you so much. Please give an applause to our wonderful panelists.